And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in the studio with me, former governor of the great state of Florida, Charlie Crist. And Governor Crist is the author of a new book, The Party's Over, How the Extreme Right Hijacked the GOP and I Became a Democrat. Governor Crist, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be with you today.
Thanks for joining us.
I got to give a shout out to your last guest, Mike Papantonio, dear friend.
Yeah.
A great lawyer.
Yeah.
And a classmate of mine in law school.
He
Wonderful
mentioned that. He's
I think the world of
a good guy.
Yes, he is. Very smart.
You were a Republican governor. You became an independent. You're now a Democrat, and you're going to try and take on Rick Scott, arguably one of the most corrupt, at least before he was a governor. Right?
But the way I like to put it, I have a record as having been governor before, and attorney general before that, and secretary of education before that. Rick Scott has now a record as governor for the past 3.5 years, but he's got a record before that. And his record before that as the CEO of Columbia HCA Healthcare Company was that company, under his leadership, had to pay the highest fine for fraud in the history of the United States of America at the time, $1.7 billion in a fine.
That's like Jamie Dimon territory.
It's getting there. And, you know, as a friend said to me the other day, listen, if you're just in the top 10 of fraudsters or fraudulent companies in America, you know, that's hard to get there.
Well, how does a guy who has been convicted of one of the largest criminal frauds, right? I mean, you know, crimes in the history of the country become the governor of a state? I don't get it.
It's unconscionable. And I think Florida's going to fix it. And that's a big part of the campaign is ethics. When I first got into public service, I was a state senator from the Tampa Bay area, St. Pete, represented Tampa, St. Pete, and part of Clearwater. And one of the first committees I got to be chairman of was the Senate Ethics and Elections Committee. And so ethics has always been very important to me because of how, frankly, my mother and father raised my 3 sisters and me to try to do what's right and to do unto others. And to try to lead a good life and leave the world a better place. Right. And so, you know, the notion that we have a governor now that headed that company, and let's look behind the numbers of the $1.7 billion. It was a healthcare company. What are they supposed to do, Tom?
Provide healthcare.
They're supposed to care. What they cared about was money.
Right.
And what they did under his leadership was what they call upcoding, which is kind of a fancy legal word. For on the street, they call stealing.
Right.
You know, and who are you stealing from? When you're a Medicare company, or you provide Medicare, you're stealing from taxpayers and sick people.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to imagine something so callous.
Well, it's a demonstration. If he spent $75 million becoming governor, it's a demonstration of what money can do. You know, how you can wallpaper over the history. I'm curious why you became a Republican in the first place. My dad was a Republican. I grew up when I was 13. I went door to door for Barry Goldwater. I mean, my dad was an Eisenhower Republican and frankly, Barry Goldwater in many ways was not. I mean, today's moderates are more like the few that are left. I mean,
Richard
Susan Collins
Nixon would probably be a Democrat today. I mean, the guy went to China. He started the EPA.
Right.
I mean,
so what got you into the Republican Party? What caused you to leave it, and why are you running as a Democrat?
I became a Republican the same reason many have in our country, because Mom and Dad were. Frankly, Tom, it's the same reason I'm a Methodist. Mom and Dad are. You know, and religion is like politics in many ways that way. Now, why did I choose to no longer be a Republican? Because the leadership of the party went crazy. And you know, my friend Jeb Bush says it better than I could ever imagine to say it. He says, you know, today's Republican Party leadership is perceived as being anti-women, anti-minority, anti-immigrant, anti-gay couples, anti-environment, anti-education. Right. I mean, pretty soon there's nobody left in the room.
Yeah, except the billionaires and the paranoid white guys.
Right, precisely that. Right, and you know, a guy like Jack Kemp, who I loved and thought was a great man and a great public servant from Buffalo, you know, he used to always say the Republican Party needs to be a big tent. Yeah. Well, because of the recent development in the Republican Party leadership of today, it's become a pup tent at best. And it's just amazing to see what's happened to it. And so if I'm going to be true to myself and my beliefs and my core principles as instilled in me by Charlie and Nancy Crist, Mom and Dad, then you couldn't stay there. You know, if the club goes bad, then you have to do what's right and
so
be brave and go.
What are the issues that you would, you'd say, okay, now I'm a Democrat, and these are the things that I stand for that, well, what are the issues that you're running on?
Sure. There's several. Ethics, which we've touched on.
Right.
And by the way,
which
Rick
should
Scott,
be transpartisan.
It absolutely is. It has nothing to do with partisan politics. It has to do, and you know what, to be honest, for me, it's never really been about right versus left. Because of Mom and Dad, it's much more so always been about right versus wrong.
Right.
And, in an issue like, stealing from taxpayers or patients as the head of a healthcare company and allowing that to happen, and then he had to plead the Fifth Amendment in order to not incriminate himself 75 times under oath.
I wish there was video of that.
Well, there may be. But at any rate, I can tell you this.
That's incredible.
That's what happened. It's publicly reported.
Yeah.
And I've never pled the Fifth in my life.
Yeah.
In fact, I was, in essence, a law enforcement officer as Attorney General of the state of Florida.
You were the chief law enforcement.
Chief law enforcement officer of the state, yeah. So that's a big difference and a big issue. Education's another one, huge. I'm a public school kid. I believe in honoring our hardworking public school teachers. 2 of my 3 sisters were public school teachers in Florida. This governor, when he gets into office, he recommends a $3.3 billion reduction in the budget. $3.3 billion reduction in the budget in public education. Now, the legislature backed off and said, no, we're only going to cut it $1.3 billion, which is still catastrophic.
Right.
When I was governor, as a Republican, I supported increasing the funding in education. So another huge difference between the two of us. Then you have voter rights, which is huge in Florida. Voter suppression, if you will. When I was still a Republican governor in 2008, when it's, McCain versus Obama, what happened is we had long lines for early voting in the fall of 2008. A friend of mine, he was at the time House Democratic leader Dan Gelber, called me, and he said, Governor, you've got to do something to lessen the size of these lines. People are not being able to vote. And so I signed an executive order saying, open them up. We've got to have more polling places and longer hours for voting. And it alleviated the problem, at least as much as we could. Go 4 years later, Rick Scott's governor, also a Republican, and we have long lines, again, longer lines. Mm-hmm. So Dan Gelber and I team up and call him and say, you've got to sign an executive order like I did and let our people vote. Let them free. He wouldn't do it. Yeah. So huge contrast. I mean, I'm the opposite of this guy in almost every way.
Right. Wow. Right on down the line.
And then there's the environment. I mean, it goes on and on. It's just unbelievable.
How's the environment in Florida? I used to read John D. McDonald novels, the old Travis McGee series, and he was always going on about the Florida developers and this and that and the other thing.
Yeah.
What is the environmental state of Florida? And as governor, what could or would you do?
Well, one thing I would do is not allow the discharges that I think are starting again today out of Lake Okeechobee. What they do is they allow discharge of a lot of water, hundreds of millions of gallons, into the Caloosahatchee River that goes between Fort Myers and Cape Coral on the west coast of Florida, and into the St. Lucie River going to the east coast of Florida out of Lake Okeechobee. Now, when you allow those discharges, all kinds of pollutants that come down from the agricultural region settle in the lake, and then you let them out in these rivers. And when you do, the rivers look like mud.
Yeah.
And this past year, we had record deaths of manatees in Florida, a lot of them near the Indian River Lagoon, where for a time children weren't allowed to go swimming because they were getting sick.
Wow.
And it's just horrible. And Governor Scott has the audacity to blame it on the president. Because the dike is too, I don't know, he blames everything on the president. But at any rate, when I was governor, we stopped the discharges. The river's cleaned up. That's just one example.
Okay, Charlie Crist, his new book, The Party's Over, How the Extreme Right Hijacked the GOP and I Became a Democrat. Governor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The Party's Over. Charlie Crist. Is there a website?
Yes, charliecrist.com.
charliecrist.com. There you go. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.